Hey.
Hi.
So that's it. Yeah, we're live. So Jeff Williams with too late for the gods, and you referred to that somewhere in one of your videos. I linked your channel in the
Okay.
description.
I have a blog under that has a lot more than I don't do a lot of videos, but I write a lot. And the blog is also toolateforthegods.com.
Okay, do you have a link for that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
But if somebody wanted, I mean, all you have to do is put in toolateforthegods.com, and there I am.
It'll pop up. Okay, cool. Too late for the gods.
Yeah. It comes from a poem by Martin Heidegger.
Yeah. That's what you refer to. Thor, go away now.
Yeah.
Come on, go cat. Go.
Ja, in German, wir kamen für die Götter zu spät und zu früh und zu spät für die Götter. Zu früh für, I'm sorry. Wir kamen für die Götter zu spät und zu früh für das Sein.
Okay, I just did a translation to German of one of my ideas, which is fit to world, and I did it to German, and it was really bad. And then Latin was aptus ad mundum. Yeah, aptus ad mundum, which I liked better. So
yeah,
but interesting that they refer to the world as mundum or mundane.
Yes, mundane means of the world.
Yeah. Anyway, but that's not how I see the world. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So tell me about yourself and anything you want to share about your background or education.
I've done a lot of different things. In the late 60s, I was a LSD taking hippie and musician. I was a professional musician from the ages of 17 to 25. In Chicago, I played guitar. I also played flute, but I played jazz, R&B, and soul. I was often the only white guy in the place. I love motorcycles, but a couple of years ago, I turned 70, and I promised my son when I was 70, I would no longer ride motorcycles or drive Porsches. So I kept that promise, and I no longer do. I went to University of Chicago for 7 years. Undergraduate, I studied philosophy and quantum physics, which at that school is not a strange combination. In the graduate, I was in what they call the Committee on Social Thought, which is their elite humanities program really by application, special application. At the time, it was chaired by Saul Bellow, who became a good friend of mine. But what I studied there was a continuation. It was philosophy at the intersection of quantum physics. So I studied philosophy, but I also studied quantum physics for a bit with Leon Letterman at Fermilab and other classes too. Just as I was starting my dissertation, some things were happening. The three people I worked with most closely were Saul Bellow, Paul Ricoeur, who was only there 1 quarter a year, and a guy from the German department who was a fantastic professor named Clayton Kelb. Well, there were a confluence of things. I was getting married and about to start a family. Clayton Kelb was leaving for University of North Carolina, and Saul Bellow was leaving for Boston College. So I had to make some decisions. This was at the same time when Price Waterhouse, out of nowhere, approached me and offered me a job in strategic consulting. I'll get to that in a second, but they were offering multiples of what I would ever make as a professor. Saul had cleared the way for me to work with Gadamer at Boston, Hans-Georg Gadamer. Clayton had invited me to either come with him to UNC, which he knew I probably wouldn't want to do, or he arranged for a fellowship for me at Harvard. And Price Waterhouse is wanting to make me wealthy as I'm getting married. And I decided at that time I had no interest in academic. I didn't want to be a scholar. I never wanted to be a scholar. I wanted to be an original thinker, which is nearly impossible to do in academics. So I took the money, and the plan was this: to keep working on philosophy until the day comes when I am no longer reliant on anybody for a career or finance. A few years ago, I retired, and I can do whatever I want. I've been working on a book ever since, but I can honestly say I've been working on this book for 50 years. It's been my single obsession all this time. The other thing that came into play is if I had gone into academics, I would have needed to write immediately. And if you look at Wittgenstein, Heidegger, Hume, Kant, they all had to apologize for their earlier writings.
Right.
I at least did not make the mistake of writing too soon. And I look where I am now and where I was at 35, and I am so glad I waited.
Yeah.
Philosophy, to do it right, takes decades. It literally takes decades. So that's pretty much my background. Like I said, I've done a lot of things. I got into consulting. It was weird. Somebody, I think I know who, recommended me. The regional manager had contacted University of Chicago, and they said, look, what we're looking for is some arrogant asshole who thinks he's brilliant, who can hold his own with CEOs and boards of directors. And they go, oh, do I have the guy for you?
Arrogant asshole. Okay, that's a pretty good recommendation.
Yeah. I can talk to anybody. I'm not shy.
Yep. Yeah. And you had a little bit of a kerfuffle with Bernardo Castro, one of my favorite. Yeah.
But Bernardo Castro is a charlatan whose only interest is amassing wealth from a cult. Yep. His philosophy, if you want to call it that, is laughable. And I have pointed that out many times, to the point where he was on some podcast on YouTube, a video like this, where he was actually lying about my position because he knew I wasn't there to defend myself. He had a forum, as I was telling you earlier. He had a forum. It was the Bernardo Castro forum. I was invited to after my third video on him by some of the members, and I was driving them crazy because they really couldn't refute what I was saying. And Castro got so upset that he left he denounced his own forum and left, said it was basically heretical. Also on Twitter, he blocked me when his big thing is that consciousness is the ontological primitive, which is absolute nonsense.
Garbage.
And he had oddly enough, he was in another argument with somebody about if computers could ever develop consciousness. And for the first time in his life, he answered a question correctly. He said, no, absolutely not. Consciousness is associated with living organisms. If there's no ATP, there's no consciousness. So
Yeah.
that gave me my entree. And I said, you're absolutely right for once. What does ATP do? It delivers energy. It makes energy available to the neurons. And if you take away that energy, there's no consciousness. That
Right.
makes energy the ontological primitive, consciousness a rare, cosmically rare self-organization of, and very temporary self-organization of energy. It emerges from energy. It is not the ontological primitive. I was immediately blocked from his Twitter account. The guy is, I mean, he's there with Deepak just scamming people for money.
Yeah.
But the philosophy, I mean, first of all, metaphysics is dead. It's been dead for over 100 years. And idealism along with it. So he grabs onto those two absolute dead ends.
Yeah.
And but he put together a story that is attractive to a certain kind of person looking for a simple answer, and the ability to think they're smarter than everybody else. But it's pure BS.
Yeah, that pretty much describes the Essentia Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
That whole and that's where he run into the money. That's basically he
Yes,
tapped into a guy that had a lot of money, and then he
exactly.
kind of went on and started blathering everywhere. And another one that I really don't care for is Donald Hoffman.
Donald Hoffman
Yeah.
started out good when he was just doing epistemology, basically, the science of consciousness. And that wasn't even epistemology. He was looking at consciousness as a neuroscientist, and his idea of the interface, consciousness as a computer interface, that worked well. There was something to it. Now, he was still overly reductive and thought that he could somehow reduce this all to a mathematical formula, which is nonsense. But he started out okay. And then he hooked up with Bernardo. And I think he's in, I think he just sold everything for the money too. But he's confused. Like, he says, well, space-time is dead. He's right. There is no space-time outside of our representational universe. Fundamental reality does not have space-time. Well, we can talk about that. It's been shown, but he agrees there's no space-time outside of our perceptions. Now, I would modify outside our perceptions. It gets much more complicated than that. But if space-time is not fundamental, there is no such thing as number. You don't have individuation without space and time. Geometry requires space, computation requires time. But he's looking for these mathematical patterns in non-space-time, which is an absurdity. So yeah, he's lost. He started out good, and he either got beyond, got over his head, or he's in for the money too. I don't really know with him.
Yeah,
but I do know Kastrup's a total fraud.
Yeah, before we leave Castro, one thing you caught him on is his argument from psychedelics. Okay, he said the default mode network is shut down. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but a lot of other shit is firing like crazy.
Exactly.
In your, up in your cortex, right?
The overall
on
brain
fire.
Is far. It's on fire on a psychedelic.
Right, on fire.
But the default mode network is down, which means you're not imposing logic on it anymore. And you're getting a very non-reductive, direct experience of your environment. Yeah, Castro has no clue what he's talking about.
And that's
he just makes shit up.
Back when I started doing acid in 1969, I'm 73, by the way.
So you are older than me.
I am older than you. Yeah. So I started
Pioneer.
doing acid in 69, and I came up with immediately back in the 60s and 70s, I came up with the idea that what acid did is it shut off that conceptualization, that rational part, right? And
Yeah,
that's a
the
default
DMN.
mode network, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And that was, and you start just getting everything raw. Like, well, we did like 1,300 micrograms back then. It was like crazy shit. And you'd look at a table, and the table would be curving all over the place.
Oh
And
yeah.
some people would say that's a hallucination. And I'm like, no, that's the raw input that you're getting. The hallucination is that you flatten the table in your brain, right? In your predictive
Exactly right.
network, right?
Exactly right. Are you
Yeah.
aware of a neuroscientist in Britain, Neil Seth?
Yeah, he's but not currently. I've run into him.
I mean, his whole thing is that we project an anticipatory hallucination on
Right,
our
right,
default.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he's right. That's
yeah,
exactly what we do.
yeah. Yeah, and that all breaks down when you do high levels of psychedelics and you're getting just,
Right. But what's happening now is you're seeing the chaos beyond your simple reduction, your daily reduction. You talked about mundane before. Mundane
yeah,
is really that reduction
reduction, right?
to a system that doesn't actually exist as a system. Um, kind of like what Carlo Rovello talks about in his blurring. That's another guy who's on the right track, Carlo Rovelli. He needs to give up his
Yeah,
numbers, but he's on the right track. Um, but yeah, you no longer are imposing. When you're on a psychedelic, you're not so much imposing what you think the world needs to be. You're getting a dose of what it actually is, and you get that
right.
interconnectedness, that entanglement, which is real. It's the only thing
Yeah.
that's real. Um, yeah, it changes everything.
And oddly enough, when you slide away from that default mode network and you slide into that raw feel stuff, you end up a
Yeah.
little bit happier. It
Oh,
raises
geez, yes.
happiness.
It
And
does,
because
unless you project your own fears onto it. Yes.
yeah,
If you panic and start trying to control it, you're in a lot of hurt. But if you just let it be, just
let
let
it
it
be. Yeah.
be. Oh, now you are connected to reality in the most primal way, and you discover what happiness is.
Yeah. So I heard you say you're a physicalist but not a materialist, and I've always had trouble with those two classifications.
Yeah, it even saying I'm a physicalist requires some explanation because I'm not anything in the usual sense. A materialist, material is associated with matter. The word comes out of mata, which is matter. Um, and matter is not fundamental. I mean, in physics,
yeah,
we always thought about energy and matter. Well, it's energy that is fundamental.
yeah,
Matter are temporary emergences out of energy and can always be converted right back to energy. So I'm a physicalist who looks at energy as the ontological prime in our universe, which isn't the real ontological prime, but it's the one we have access to.
yeah,
And I'm not a materialist. And as far as physicalism, I'm non-reductive. I'm not a physicalist. I'm more of a poetic physicalist. It's you can't be reality, whatever that word means, and it's a word that has become all but useless at this point. But
yep,
what exists is not reducible to numbers or systems or rationality. It just isn't. We to make that happen, um, what we have to do is what. Are you familiar with the physicist Eugene Wigner?
yeah,
Okay, Wigner came up with what he called his empirical law of epistemology. which is this. Any system, he was talking about mathematical systems, but it's any system, any rational system can only exist as such when we reduce everything to within a very limited time, space, and chosen events. And that gives you a system. It doesn't really exist as a system. We had to reduce it to that to get a system. Now, what happens is new events keep intruding into there, which means what you have is an increase in information, which over time will heighten entropy. Or if we go outside of our bounded space-time, we introduce more information and we get entropy. Everything reverts back to the chaos at some point. And what we think of as systems only can be viewed as systems if we greatly reduce. Carlo Rovelli. I don't know what that means, but anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, well, that's what Rovelli calls blurring. In time itself, he says, Carlo Rovelli is like a world-class physicist. He's working on quantum loop gravity, but he's a huge physicist, but he's also a philosopher. And he says that even time itself only exists when we reduce to a few events and look at them relatively. And from that, he has his dictum, time is ignorance. Because if you know, there is no time.
Yeah.
And if you go back to Heisenberg, a little known thing is Heisenberg and Heidegger had a lot of conversation for a couple of decades. And in 1953, they met in Munich, and Heidegger presented his absolutely seminal essay, The Question Concerning Technology, and Heisenberg responded with his own essay. And in that essay, he said two things. He goes, quantum mechanics has fundamentally changed our world. First of all, it's dissolved subject-object metaphysics. Subject-object metaphysics is no longer viable, which was also one of Heidegger's points, but from a different direction. But he also said we can no longer look at science as a direct study of nature. We can only look at science as a study of how we perceive nature, how we process it, because we affect nature as soon as we look at it, we're entangled with it, and that was the measurement problem. And he goes, it also exceeds our understanding. He goes, the quantum world is ungraspable. We're limited to logic, space, and time. Those things don't exist primally in coherent quantum existence. We can't grasp it because we can't think outside of space and time. And that's why science always, it claims to be mathematical, but always reverts to metaphor. And the metaphors are always grounded in space and time because we cannot think any other way. And that will always make false any metaphysics that we come up with, which is why metaphysics is dead. Because you're making stories about what cannot even be grasped. The other thing he said is, science is now going to be in silos because any system, just like Wigner said, is highly reductive and only holds for a small group of events in space-time. So there could never be a grand unification theory, which, by the way, was my central argument with Leon Lederman when I was working with him at Fermi. Is his whole mission was to find the grand unification theory, and my whole mission was to tell him why that was impossible. And unfortunately, he was a great man. He died a few years ago, but so far I'm winning.
So impossible to come up with a grand unification theory.
Cannot
That's
be done.
interesting. Yeah, I'm like my approach to philosophy has been well. It involves. Let me see here if I can show you this. It involves basically looking at our epistemology. Uh, First of all, I make space-time QFT, basically quantum field theory, I guess. I make that as kind of my god, right? That's like my
Okay.
default. Basically, that's my primary assumption that to make anything intelligible for human beings, kind of what you were saying, we have to look at space-time and particles in space-time, and from that, everything else falls. But on
Yeah, can I just add? So far I'm with you, but the thing about quantum field theory isn't the quantums; it's the energy in the fields. That's what's
right,
primary, and that's why I go to QFT also, for what we can know from a scientific point of view. But I'll expand on that
right,
later. Let's go through your thing.
okay. Yeah, the one interesting thing is about reality, right? Like people would say, okay, you see a table as solid, and you can touch a table, but then when you figure it out, okay, it's mostly space.
Exactly.
There's
I make that point
very little,
often. Right.
right? But then a brilliant guy that I was talking to on a forum about 15 years ago said, "You're not a fucking neutrino." In other words, you are a thing that basically, uh, what I look at is like fit. Okay, fit to world. Basically,
Okay.
that
Yeah.
we are a kind of thing, right? And we fit to the world, and that is our epistemology. And the only way that we can deal with it is with this space-time particle model, right? That there are things in the world, there are objects at our level. So our epistemology involves the realism. Like I subscribe to a kind of a naive realism, basically, that the
Right.
only thing that I can do in the universe is to behave to interface with space time, and I go from that. But before we get there, like I've got these things called R1. Basically,
Okay.
R1 is what we all learn when we're toddlers, right?
Okay.
As we develop as organisms, basically it's our reality one. It's the world of objects and space time, and moving around and being a human being. And then R2 would be an extension of that kind of thinking that gets us to science, right? and
Okay.
and I don't think we can go anywhere else. And now M1 is metaphysical bullshit narratives, right? Where we come
Mm-hmm.
up with oh, what if you're a brain in a vat? Well, if you're a brain in a
Right.
vat, you're still going to have R1 and R2. It ain't going to
Can,
make
can
any
I,
difference.
I'm with you. I just want to make the comment that in R2, especially today, we've got too much of the metaphysical stuff in there. You get goofy stuff that is pure fiction, like many worlds theory or
Yeah,
Bohm's
yeah,
pilot wave. That's just empty metaphysical nonsense. And I can talk to Wyatt at some point if you're interested. But science has because it's up against this wall that they can't, the density matrices between us and quantum coherence are impenetrable yet, and it drives them crazy because they're they still need to have this idea of a rational deterministic universe, so they make up these stories. For example, Sean Carroll takes the metaphor of Hilbert space literally, sees these
yeah.
orthogonals and says, oh, see, we have many worlds. No, we don't. Yeah, it's just you went off into metaphysics with the complex numbers in Hilbert space and
Right.
drew a story out of that. But I'm sorry, I've interrupted again. Let's get through your thing.
Okay. So basically, my assumption is this. space-time, and that comes from R1. That basically we're all naturalists, at core. We are a kind of organism that is, a naturalist. And from there, you try to establish a tool which is like God's eye view, I call it, where you try to look outside of being human. And that means that, number one, I've got this, what is it, epoche, except it's a reverse Husserl. And then I say, screw the mind. We're not going to talk about the mind. We're not going to talk about humans. We're going to try to imagine what the world is, right?
That was, by the way, that was Heidegger's turn. That's why he left phenomenology, because he didn't. He goes, if I try to understand being from a subject, I have not escaped subject-object metaphysics.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and you have this egocentric view, which is phenomenology, and that leads to basically solipsism, skepticism, infinite regress, and nonsense.
And you're still mired in the subject-object metaphysics, which is the block to ever finding anything that's true. So okay.
Right. So then from there, basically, we're not yet in a position, right, with this to discuss what we think mind is. But then we get down to the point where you get into science and biology, and we find out, we land at our toes, we crawl up our ankles and knees and, up into our brain. We find out that we are organisms in the world, right? So if we're organisms in the world, then we can start to figure out exactly how we interact with this, basically. And that's sort of an overall sketch. And it gets a little, I call it the transcendental argument for naturalism, that basically we need the space-time assumption in order to even start talking, in order to do anything. So we may as well accept it. And we want to keep bracketing mind and philosophy of mind until later. But you come up with this common world naive realism. Like when you think about what is real, what we really mean by that is there is no ultimate truth. I mean, this idea that there's a noumena, like I think Kant kind of expressed that there is no, that the noumena is something we're never gonna approach, right? That there's something out there we're never going to get to, and so stop trying. What we mean by real is this common world naive realism, and so that's kind of the assumed epistemology, and that's the space-time particles, right? And if you accept space-time particles as being, there's a little bit of pushback here, but we'll get to that. If you accept that, then you realize that out of space-time and particles flows logic, math, regularity, and universals. And that's how I account for math and numbers being real in the universe, right? Except it's really interesting because when you have particles in space-time, and you end up with like an object, like a cup or something. Oh, I'm using my hands to show you things. It's not working. You can't see me. But basically, there is a tremendous amount of things that it has every object or every group of particles in space-time has an almost infinite giveness, that it gives you all these structures, and all of these things flow out of it, right? So we can interface with an object, and we can interact with it all day long and come up with new numbers and new math and new geometry and whatever. So, but then from there, when you realize what you are, and you come to biology and neuroscience, and you start to inform what kind of a thing am I, basically, you end up with adapters and this fit to world. And the fit to world is why we see it as space-time particles. And I don't think we can see it any other way. So basically, we are an adapter on this noumena, this reality, and the interaction of humans and the world, okay, me in the world, basically is what mind ends up being. that. Are you an embodied mind guy? You know
No,
about Varela and
I
Thompson?
think, yeah, this needs a lot more explanation, but I'll quickly just say that mind is a quantum event of its own. The energy comes from the ATP in the brain, but it's not just brain. It's it's really a quantum. It's a quantum emanation and entanglement. It's energy. I mean, when we try to see if somebody's conscious, we can measure it. We can measure it in the electromagnetic waves of various forms that it emits. That energy does stuff. It entangles, and I think that's a much bigger story. And I can't. If we have time, we'll get to it later because I really
Okay.
want to understand yours.
Yeah, we're probably going to disagree on philosophy of the mind then,
Yeah,
because I'm
probably.
more of a yeah. I do not like Penrose and Hameroff's quantum ideas about the mind.
I
It
think
doesn't
they're,
work in biology.
yeah,
So, oh my
actually,
God. So my friend Scott is here, and he's managing chat for me, and he put up the shaken fist.
oh, okay.
Uh, some conspiracy theories about physics I wouldn't mind debunked and such. Talk
Okay.
about physics at some anyway. Okay,
The Ham, Penrose and Hameroff are very much the beginning first step of this, but we do know now. I mean, they've done experiment, not Penrose and Hameroff, but there are some experimentalists who have, in fact, um, done experiments on microtubules and found that they do at that size and within a brain in that kind of environment maintain quantum properties. It
yeah,
specifically superradiance.
yeah, but it's the wrong scale basically for
No,
my.
but the neuron is the wrong scale. Also,
I think the neuron is a little closer. So
no, it's just the beginning. We don't measure consciousness at the neuron level. We measure it at the electromagnetic wave level. That's what counts. That's where the action takes place. Everything
okay,
is energy. Uh, but we'll get to that later. I want to
okay,
let's
yeah,
go back to Kant for a minute because
okay,
that's I think a point where we might start our divergence. Kant certainly said the noumena was not knowable because it that world knows nothing about space, time, and reason. It only, but the whole 19th century was very largely a reaction that we couldn't know the noumenal. We just couldn't know it logically. And that's how Romanticism came about, was that you can go beyond the reduction, the objective reduction to an aesthetic experience. And that's really what fueled Nietzsche and Heidegger. That we can expand it, and that's what we do with psychedelics. It's the same damn thing. We expand outside of that objectivity, and now the noumena is at least experienceable. It's not something we can describe as a system. We can't measure it.
right,
It transcends all of that, but we can get some entree into noumena, and that's what Nietzsche saw in music, and what Heidegger sees in poetic thought, is that we get some entree into noumena, but physics can't. Okay, physics can never breach the density matrix. But in a sense, we're still, space and time is our given mode of perception. We can't get out of space and time, but we
we agree
can
on that.
do it.
Yeah,
But and that's why it makes no sense to try for physics to go any further in trying to understand coherence. You can't do it. And we have to understand also that space and time, if we didn't exist, it wouldn't exist either. It's just our represent but there's something very strange there. I don't know if we have time to go into it, but so I'm just going to stop at that point on that.
Okay.
But there's a lot more to it. But what you're talking about as numbers and reason and mathematics, is Kant was right about that. Is that comes from our innate pure reason and our innate sensibilities, which we project onto the universe. And that's how we perceive it. I mean, all we have, you talked before, like the wall in front of you is not this, like I'm looking at a beige opaque flat plane in front of me. That doesn't actually exist, doesn't exist at all. It's an energy field. The things that we call matter are such an infinitesimally small part of that field. And that's why you can look through glass, because all I'm really seeing, all we ever see, are reflected or refracted photons. And those photons are hitting my retina, and it's sending an electromagnetic signal to my brain, and my brain is drawing pictures of what isn't there. Now, the energy field is there. Energy is real. That's the one thing we know is real. And that energy field is bouncing photons back at me. And my brain's trying to make sense of it. So it says, okay, let's make it this it's a rectangle, and it's beige, and it has a certain texture. And if we were all to die, if all of humanity were to die, that picture would go away, because that doesn't exist at all. What exists that we can sense is an energy field. Now, what's an energy field? I don't know, because that's really, energy fields are the most extreme pointer state that we have. It's the closest thing that we can experience to what's on the other side of the density matrix.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get to is that okay, all of that would go away if we weren't around, right?
Yeah.
The beige and all of that, but there is still something that okay, this is us, we're here, and we have this fit to world, right? This fit to reality. There's still some structure here that is important.
But there's not a
There's
structure. There's an existence, but it's not a structure. Let me just
okay,
add two
why?
things real quick. Let me,
Okay.
there's, on that fit to reality, there are two modes of thought, and we need to look at both of them. From an objective scientific point of view, what we're actually doing is trying to fit reality to our innate reason, numbers, objectivity. That's that's Wigner's empirical law of empirical law of epistemology, where we are reducing to something we can draw in our mind, but the structure doesn't exist as a structure. At the quantum field level, there is no causality, there is no order. It's quantum foam. All we have is this bubbling of virtual quantum foam in pure chaos. Now it all interacts, and some of that interaction we can see as, if we drill down on it and ignore everything else, it looks like a structure to us. So we interpret it that way, and it has practical advantage. It gives us things to hold on to. It's not entirely a fantasy. We are focusing on something that exists, but not as it exists. We are forcing reality to our mode of thinking. In aesthetic thought, it's just the opposite. This is what Heidegger talks about is Gelassenheit. We are letting what is out there form us instead. And that takes us out of subject object into an entangled sort of experience with.
Okay.
But let me go one step further. Not only do we not have a structure there, what we're looking at as structure wouldn't be there either. As much as physics tries to deny this, they always end up not being able to overcome Wigner's friend. There is no reduction to eigenstate without a conscious observation. I can tell you why in a minute if you doubt that. But there isn't an there are no quanta without our participation. So if we don't exist, what we've done is that first, all of consciousness is reductive. And now we try to reverse it now that we're at the point where we can maybe do that. But consciousness, and this is where I think Penrose is absolutely right, is that consciousness is co-created at the moment. It's co-active is entanglement with that first eigenstate reduction. And it doesn't change what's behind the density matrix. And that's where people like Sean Carroll and the many world people go astray. They assume that if things change on our side, things change on the other side also. But if there's no time, space, or causality on the other side, there's no change. It's only what we perceive of it. We have, at the moment of eigenstate reduction, we have made a drastic reduction from all to this little thing. Now, what we think of, yeah. I'm sorry, did you say something?
Okay. No, I just said okay.
Oh, okay. Now, what we think of as superposition is, again, superposition is a spatial metaphor for what we can't grasp. But the idea we get from it, it's everything at once. And what we'll do is as organisms, we can't deal with everything at once. We want to survive on this planet. So we got to reduce it to what's practical. And so what our universe is a process of this reduction that we see through our given space and time. But that's the first reduction. And that's why QFT, quantum fields, are the pointer state. It's taking all of that and it's putting it into space-time. It's energy in space-time. That's all quantum fields are, energy in space-time. And it throws up a bunch of chaos, which is all that entanglement coming and going. I mean, all that superposition coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. And from that, self-organization, we can intuit organizations by reducing it to a few relationships out of that quantum foam. And from that, we can see things like self-organization. But even at that self-organization isn't the wall you see. It's this complex interplay of various quantum fields, exchanging energy back and forth. So where's the reality, really? This is why I say the word real has all but lost its meaning. Many people want to say, well, what's real is this computer in front of me that I'm touching. That's real. Is it really? What's real then is, well, no, it's a bunch of quanta. Well, the quanta are really just localized excitations along a quantum field wave. It's the foam. Is that really real? Because it's just a momentary blip on quantum fields, which is the lowest level we can ever get to. But is that real? Well, no. It's our thinking it's our experience in time and space. Because forget about thinking in time and space. We experience in time and space, and we're stuck in there. We can't get out of it. And so for us, whatever that is on the other side of the density matrix at its pointer state is just simply the vibrations of quantum fields, energy. So is that real, or is real on the other side of the density matrix?
Yeah.
Real is a, you'll never get to the bottom of real because it doesn't point to anything real. That's the problem. And if we have to get to real, that would be, I mean, take Leggett and the Leggett inequalities, which have been experimentally proven. There is nothing real in the physical sense, in the physicist's sense of an entity, two measurable properties at the quantum field level. There's nothing real there. It's just vibrations. And vibrations
Okay.
in what? We don't even, I mean, what is vibrating? We can't even really get that. All we can do is measure the vibrations. We can say, well, a photon, the electromagnetic field vibrates at these frequencies, but what's vibrating? Who knows? But is that real, or is it that in fact is just our experience in space and time in a very reductive way from what's the other side of the density matrix? So realism to me doesn't have, it loses any sense.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do is recover the word real, basically,
Yeah, but where are you going to put it?
because I am an organism and I have a fit to this world, right? And there is something there, right? There is a complexity to the world, and I call that
Oh,
structure.
but structure is, here's the thing, is structure implies an intended design or something solid, and that doesn't really exist. Structure is what we project onto things. They
Okay, you
don't
don't
exist. I
right.
mean, there are no ideas outside of our head. It means there are no structures outside of our head. There's this chaos that we reduce to something that we can draw as a structure. But if we keep widening the frame of reference, that structure disappears into the chaos.
Okay. But let's see. Okay, we have carbon atoms, right? Basically.
Well, I mean, if we reduce, I mean, first we have to reduce the eigenstate, then we have to go from that to a reduction of fields to particles, and would you say we have a carbon atom and it's got these electrons floating around it, but it doesn't have electrons floating around it. It's got it, the electrons themselves are in superposition as a cloud, but they don't even exist as a cloud because we intuit the time and space. So no, we don't. I mean, you can't go down to carbon atoms and say, okay, I've found reality, because you haven't. You still
Well,
have, you've got a metaphor. A metaphor. It might be a visual metaphor, but it's a metaphor in time and space of something that doesn't exist in time and space. It exists in a cloud of superposition, but the cloud again is a spatial metaphor that leads us astray.
okay, but how do you? Okay, so we have two carbon atoms now. Now the carbon atom, when you combine it basically in methane, you've
Mhm.
got you're dealing with a quantum field basically. That's become complex because of these different particles ending up
But the
participating in it, right?
particles
But
themselves are, but the particles themselves are nothing more than interactions of quantum fields. For
right,
example, any particle that contains that has what we think of as mass has interacted with the Higgs field. Every particle in all of them, all of them have interacted with the electromagnetic field. And we're set up in a way where if it cannot interact with the electromagnetic field, we cannot know that it exists. It'll pass us right by. And maybe that's the deal with dark matter and dark energy, if in fact it exists at all, is if nothing that our senses are set up to perceive electromagnetically. If something exists and does not interfere or interact with the electromagnetic field, we can't know of its existence. So already at the particle level, it's dependent on interacting with the electromagnetic field. But what we really have, as far as we can think it, as far as we can make it some kind of object for us, is all we really have are interplays, chaotic interplays of various quantum fields.
Okay. What I'm trying to account for is basically if we have uh, naive reality, we have a carbon atom here and we have a carbon atom here, right? And there's a
Right.
certain metric or distance between them. Now you
Mm-hmm.
can't deny that there are, other carbon atoms, and they basically have different positions in what we consider space and time. So this whole thing here is something. There is something real about where things are. So we need this.
But what's
We almost
real
need
is
a
not what you're
metric.
looking at there. But you're not. See, that's the thing. Is now we get back to what does real mean? It we represent it that way, and we can find those things in time and space, but they're not real as what we've just imagined it to be. That what you've drawn there is not what exists.
Okay, what
And
exists then? What
quantum
what gives
waves.
it this? Well, what gives it this metric quality? Why does it make a difference if a carbon atom is here or if it's here? What makes a difference? So there's something underlying that
Yes,
is a metric.
what that thing that's underlying it is itself not measurable. We understand it that way. We find these patterns, okay? We find patterns and they hold up
Okay.
for a while, and we make a metaphor out of them. And with atoms, we've had all kinds of metaphors. Now we're down to superpositional clouds, which is something completely different. Um, so they're always making spatial metaphors of something that doesn't exist that way. So yeah, you're measuring, and these measurements are holding up for now. But you got to remember that that is a absolutely radical reduction of what is not measurable.
Okay. I'm trying to
You
find
can't.
basically I'm trying to find a place to start, a place that we can put the pen.
You can't. That's the problem. You can't.
Okay, so but that leaves us in nowhereville.
Yeah.
We can't
Well,
say anything
what
about
it does,
anything.
no, but that's not true.
Okay.
We can't. We have to rethink what it means to know. And that was Heidegger's whole thing, too. We have to rethink what knowing something is. And the physicist model is not the way. That hit a dead end 100 years ago. It's still trying to plow through that impenetrable wall, and it's getting nowhere because it's impossible. But we can still know things. We can know
Yeah.
things, but we can't know it as a physicist wants to know things, which means we go back to physical experience and we meditate on physical experience. What are the essence of things? How do things relate? I mean, how do we're all entangled? What does this entanglement mean? And what does it show us? If we look at essences, if we look at our own human essence, the essence of what's around us, does that give us anything closer to what's on the other side of the density matrix? Because that's the only thing you could ever put a pin in, and we can't get there, but we can experience it more broadly if we do it non-reductively, which is why I call myself a non-reductive physicalist.
Yeah.
I learned all the physics and I know it's dead end. I know that. But I also know that I know things, but I don't know things through physics. For me, physics is valuable for its failures, because that's the beacon that says, come here and look, because here's where the mystery is that you're trying to solve. It's here. Now you're going to have to rethink how you think things. But if you do that, if you solve that, you will.
Carbon atom being real is like your opinion, man. Anyway, Shaken Fist has had a lot of comments here on I'm going to have to review them. The thing is, what this point of putting a pen down and being able to figure things out. So I have,
Well, there is a pin. There is a
started
pin.
with. I've
The
started
pin
with
is
this.
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I've started with this naive materialism, right? This basically the naive materialism tells me that there is something about the universe that I call structure, and I know you don't like that word. Maybe we can find a better word for it, but there is something about it that makes it so that I am an animal here and you're an animal there, and we can't. I mean, we can go off in deep space physics all day. That isn't going to do us any good. What's going to do us good is to go over here and start looking at biology and the neuroscience of what we are, and we are basically adapters to the world. And as adapters, we speak in space-time particle language, right? So then we can kind of figure out what we are. Like, that, I mean, you do believe that you're a living organism that is going to expire sometime in the
Of
next
course.
30 years.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. And
But
from
I
that,
don't, just let me say, but I don't think I know that through biology, neuroscience, and thinking of myself as an adaptive fitter to the world. I know
yep,
that because it's grounded in an experience that's far broader to any of that. And I would dispute that adapters fit to world exhaust what the situation is.
for mind, you mean?
For anything.
Okay. Well, it gives us a place to start, and then we
Yeah, but
can,
see, that's the problem of metaphysics, is it always gives you the wrong place to start.
Yeah, that's why I don't really call this metaphysics. I'm more right here in this R1 field, basically, how we
Yeah,
understand the world
but
naively.
but there, I think our one view is still metaphysical.
Uh,
I,
well,
I and that's what needs to be overcome. Subject object
but
metaphysics is what has to be overcome, and we weren't always that way. You go to pre-Socratic thought, and their R1 would be very different from what you're describing.
well, what I'm getting at with that is what a raccoon would have. Like,
We
what
don't know
kind
what
of
a
a
raccoon would have. We can't
uh,
imagine it. We cannot
I,
imagine a world of a raccoon.
right amount of mushrooms, and you can get there. You can basically reacting as a living organism to the world around you. And raccoons climb trees, and I chop trees, and
Yes,
stuff like
yes,
that.
that's
But I
true.
mean,
And you do that,
there's
and you
this,
do that through physical experience. And that's the only
yeah,
ground we have, is what we physically experience in this life is the ground. When we go beyond what we can experience, we make metaphysical error. When we
yeah,
reduce what we experience to what part of what you have in R1, then we we we, we miss the reality. We reduced it to something that's trivial compared to what it actually is. That's where the
okay,
rethinking has to come in. We have to overcome metaphysics, but we have to overcome reductionism.
yeah.
And that was really the
I
whole dispute between Heidegger and Heisenberg.
I'm
They
a
agreed on
not
the
a reductionist.
metaphysics.
I'm not a reductionist. I'm a constructivist, basically.
Well,
So,
that's a projective reduction.
well, it
You're
basically
you're you're, you're
how
using a
you
reductive. Don't forget, consciousness is a reduction. We reduce the eigenstate, from there reduce from chaos to complexity, and from complexity to order. But all of that was a mental reduction. As soon as you start trying to get systematic, you have gone into reduction, and that reduction will always bring you right back to metaphysics, always, every time, which has happened to science now. That's why we have metaphysics in science. We've got many worlds. We've got pilot wave. We've got all these things that you would have expected from medieval philosophers.
right. See, I see what you're doing as reductivist, and
How's that?
uh, like anytime you try to pin something down and start to construct, you tear it down and say we don't know, we don't know, we don't know.
Well,
And I'm trying to
not
get to a
exactly.
point where what we
Can I
do know.
clarify that? But
Sure.
that's not exactly what I'm saying. I'm
Okay.
saying we can know if we ground it in the experience and don't go beyond the experience. I'm tearing down the structures precisely because they're reductions. You can't make those structures without reducing, again, to limited time, space, and chosen events. It's the only way you're going to
Right.
get a structure. If you widen the frame of reference, that perceived structure now disappears back into the chaos. You added more information. The increase in entropy is absolutely inevitable.
Okay. Hmm. I think I'm stuck with this view that I'm trying to ground myself back into being a raccoon first of all. And from a raccoon, basically because I'm a thinky raccoon, I get to R2, which gets me to basically biology and neuroscience, and that's where I start to understand what I am. And yeah, that's reductive, but
It
then
see
it
it
becomes constructive
Yeah,
because
exactly. That is exactly my point. That is exactly my point. You had to reduce to construct. That's just simply the way that is the whole point. Reductionism is a practical tool. It is nothing that's going to get you to the truth. Reductionism is not meant originally to get you to the truth. It's to get you a simple schematic that gives you some grasp for maneuverability to plan ahead uh, naively and try to make some practical gain. That's what you're getting at there. You're reducing to construction, and it has a practical uh, application that is greatly responsible for our being here today. But we err when we try to confuse that with a path to the truth of things, because it's not. It's just the opposite.
see, I don't think there is a truth to things beyond that
Yeah,
because
that's
I,
but
I, I don't
you won't, as
think,
long as if you're stuck within subject object metaphysics, okay? And you're saying
yeah.
this is what exists. You will never see how there's a truth outside of it because you're stuck. That is the authoritarian nature of metaphysics, is that it gives you a picture that provides you a way of explaining things, and you can't get outside of that. That's the whole point of psychedelics, to break you out of that, so that you can start seeing that, no, you know what, there is that structure is wrong. There is a reality, there is truth, but it can't be understood in those terms. It needs something non-reductive. It needs something aesthetic. Um, and that's where you place your pin in the aesthetic being with what surrounds you. That's where you can learn truth. But if you're stuck within metaphysics, you can't see that. It's impossible to see that. You're going to be too practical. You're going to look for something where I can explain everything. And it gets me back to my conversations with Leon Letterman, and I won. He won the Nobel Prize, but I won the bet.
You want the bet. Okay. I think I would have. I don't know. Would you have preferred the Nobel Prize?
No, no, that
No.
means nothing to me.
Okay.
They don't have a Nobel
Yeah.
Prize in philosophy anyway, so
Yeah.
fortunately.
Okay. The aesthetic. Does that harken back to Heidegger? Is that?
Yes. Heidegger and
Yeah.
Nietzsche and the Romantics before them. Goethe
Yeah.
in a way.
Okay. I'm. I don't know. The aesthetic for me is this me being an organism in the world, right? And
Yes,
and
yes,
and that's
that's the start of it.
and I
But it's
interact with things. And when I interact with a thing, I draw from that. It has giveness. Every kind of
yes,
thing around
that's
me
right.
has giveness, basically.
Yes,
And it
but see what you're doing there. That I agree with that completely. But what you've just done is instead of projecting and constructing, you're letting. That's Heidegger's word,
okay,
Gelassenheit. You're letting it
letting
impact you. That's why Heidegger goes to the poetry as being speaking through man. Music. I was a musician, and I understand it at the musical level. On those nights when I was an authentic musician, and that wasn't every night, unfortunately, but it happened. On those nights, I had no idea what I was playing. I was just feeling the room, and it was speaking through me. And there were nights when I was done, there was a stunned silence before the applause. That's when I knew I did it. And that's I think
right,
what drew me to Heidegger is I'm not when I was an authentic musician, I didn't construct anything. I wasn't thinking, well, okay, now I'm going to go to a dominant seventh, so I'm going to use the altered scale, and then we're going to go to a minor ninth. So
right.
I'm going to structure it so I go to Dorian. I didn't. Those things were so far. Miles Davis went to Juilliard, and he said, "Yeah, I had to learn all that stuff so I could forget it. You have to forget it.
Yeah.
You have to let it speak through you." My real music was never a construction. On my workman nights when I was didn't have that perception, I was a very adept workman. And I said, okay, well, now I'm going to do the Dorian, and we're going to look for a leading tone that's going to take me to the major seventh chord. Those were workman nights, and I got applause and I got paid, but I'm not proud of that. That's the difference. To me, that's the difference.
Yeah, you were living. You were being a raccoon with your instrument, basically
Yeah,
being in the world. Yeah,
being in
being
the
the
world is
organism that you are.
everything. And, and,
Yeah, but
and
I want to know
knowing,
more about it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want
But
to
you
know
want to
more
what?
about it than that. Like
But
I,
you will.
I,
You will.
I introduce
You
all of science, basically all of neuroscience and all of biology into my world of being a raccoon, so that even when I'm tripping balls, I uh, I have some sense of where I am in the world and what I'm doing, and I can give it a like when I look at a tree, I see molecular biology. Okay, I'm a molecular biology addict, and and basically it expands what the tree is to me. Okay, I mean I can dance around it in my imagination, and of course none of that shit is really happening. It's except there is something about it that's right. I'm getting something right. I know that there's photosynthesis going on, whatever that is. I mean, if you could feel the entire photosynthesis of an oak tree, that would be great. But if you can't do that, you can at least uh, reduce it and then construct it back,
No, but
and
that's
and and
exactly
get a
what I'm
better feel
saying.
of it.
Is you're doing it,
Yeah.
but it's a reduction, and a reduction is always going to black off the truth. To
I don't
experience the
think it
tree,
blocks off the truth. Yeah.
sure it does, because it
Yeah.
gives you
That's
the answer. You
well
now
because
think
I.
you understand the tree, but you don't understand the tree at all. You understand it of what you've gotten mechanically, but the tree itself is something entirely different. The tree has a relationship that's older than old. It had a beginning at the beginning of life. Who knows what life is? Certainly isn't reduced to photosynthesis. And through all of that mystery, it is here interacting with you, interacting with its environment, interacting with other trees, interacting with the atmosphere. And it has a vitality to it. And it's once you lose that vitality and try to you've reduced it. Any reduction is going to remove you from that vitality in that entanglement with everything else. That's where the reality is, and that gets us back
Uh,
to quantum fields. But I'm not saying. I mean, I studied science too. I know physics as well as probably 90% of the physics professors in the world, but I don't see the world that way. I used to, and I had to overcome that because it gets you to every science has its equivalent of the impenetrable wall of the density matrix. You can't get beyond it, and you're stuck in a system. All systems oversimplify as a reduction and give you the impression of understanding, the illusion of understanding, when in fact you blocked yourself off from the possibility of understanding, because the tree itself is not photosynthesis, it's not reducible to photosynthesis, it's not reducible to plant cells with cell walls. It isn't reducible to that. It's way beyond anything you can systematize.
Okay.
And that's something you can experience, you can look at its nature, but you can't describe it scientifically. You just simply can't do it. And to do that puts you off in, again, the equivalent of Sean Carroll's Many Worlds. It gives you a
Okay.
false reality.
Yeah. See, I don't see it that way. I see it as basically giving you another perspective on reality, another one and another one and another one. And you can have
It does that.
100 perspectives on the trees, right? 1,000, a million, an infinite number. You basically construct from what you know about the tree, but then we can learn about things in the world, right? And
There's
there's got to
nothing
be
wrong.
something. But
Yeah, but I don't fully devalue learning scientific things from that aspect.
right,
I do the same thing, but the critical point is to not be fooled by it, not to take that as don't stick the pin there, because if you stick the pin there, you're missing the bigger picture.
well, I
It's a
wouldn't
good
stick
thing
the
to
pin.
know.
I wouldn't stick the pin. Basically, gently put it down and draw from. Oh God, there's this object-oriented philosophy. Are you familiar with that? They
Yeah,
talk about the giveness of objects and the historicity of objects and all of that.
right.
And and you have referred to density matrix a couple times. Can you explain
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Oh, that's the formulation for determining the probabilities of something going from this confused quantum coherent state of everything at once to being reduced to eigenstate in our universe.
Okay.
It's basically it's a matrix. It had to be reduced to a matrix because quantum is not commutable, and so you
Okay.
couldn't do it algebraically. You had to see it because it wasn't commutable. It was easier to deal with in a matrix, and so you've got all of these matrices that give you densities, and the densities tell you what it is, the probabilities of something actually entering our our um, our universe in eigenstate. It's the reduction. It isn't actually something that exists. There isn't this big block called the density
Right.
matrix. It's our way of trying to figure out non-commutatively the probabilities of something reducing to eigenstate.
Okay. I need to take a 1 minute break. So
Okay,
can we
yeah,
hang on for a minute?
yeah,
I
of course.
gotta go out and check. I gotta go check something.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm back. I'm
Okay.
cooking something and I have to check on
Oh,
it.
good. You know what? All of that reminded me of one comment I wanted to make way back on Kastrup and his being a charlatan.
Yeah.
He tries to portray himself as an expert in quantum physics. He never took a course in quantum physics in
Right.
his life. He was a computer tech at CERN. That would be like a
Yeah. Yeah.
computer tech at an investment bank saying, "Okay, I'm an expert in mergers and acquisitions." I mean, he was a computer tech.
Yeah.
He made sure the computers ran.
Yeah. Yeah. We have some creationists that do the same thing. They, like, one guy worked at SpaceX, and I managed to find his resume, and he was talking about how he was talking to Elon Musk and hanging out with him and creating all the, doing all this stuff and launching rockets. Well, it turned out he was laying Ethernet cable between offices. That was his job.
Yeah, that's pretty similar to
Yeah, exactly.
Kastrup's expertise in quantum physics.
Right,
He
right.
once did a debate with another hack named Sabrina Hofstadter, who's a crank, but she is a real physicist.
Yeah,
Her ideas are
I like
idiotic,
her.
but she did study physics, and she handed him his ass. I mean,
Yeah.
she made such a fool of this guy.
I'm not sure if I think I got that. I was watching that debate, but I'm not sure if I saw the whole thing. But it's
Oh, it
hard for
was
me to watch
hilarious.
Castrop. Castrop just blows the top of my head off all the time. I just
Yeah, I
can't.
have. I did a short series of things on him a few years ago and have paid no attention to him since.
Yep.
I felt good that he was so frustrated he had to lie about me on an interview, he had to block me from Twitter,
Yeah.
and he had to disavow and flee his own forum. I figured, I'm done with that. Yeah, go make your money.
That's pretty good. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to link your blog. Yeah, I'm kind of burning out, but
Yeah,
what
sure.
I guess my challenge for you is to think about this thing that
Hmm.
basically I'm here
Hmm.
and I have a cup, okay, and
Hmm.
there's something going on in the real world,
Oh
whatever the
yeah,
real world is, that
we're in
makes that
agreement there.
cup a certain distance from me, and all of these things. So my challenge is to figure out what is it that underlies that causes that metric.
And
When you say we measure something, we do measure something. What the hell is that?
I'm right in the middle of writing a book on exactly that question
Okay.
under the modest title, working title of What is the Universe? Couldn't get more
Oh, wow.
modest than that, huh?
No, that's pretty
I don't,
modest. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and that is a discussion on its own that we certainly didn't have time for today. Should you ever
Okay.
want to redo this, do another one of these where we focus entirely on that question, it's a very, very difficult question. And it takes a lot of explaining. I think I have made some headway into that,
Okay.
but we're going to have to talk about certain
Is there?
things in really new developments in quantum physics. For example, there's a just genius of a physicist in Israel, Avshalom Elitzur, who is saying, I think he's great because he's saying things in physics that I've been saying in philosophy for a long time, but he has experimental proof of these things, or at least demonstrations of these things. But we would need to go into that, and that takes a little bit of explanation. But I'd
What is
be
his
happy to
name
do that.
again?
Avshalom, Avshalom, Elitzur, Elitzur. Oh, have you ever watched the Kurt Jamango videos on
Yeah.
YouTube?
Yeah. Yep.
He
A lot of
did
them.
he did an interview with him that he posted last week, I think it was. I watched it
Okay.
last night. It is. one of the most amazing discussions I have ever witnessed in my life.
Yeah.
Um, I go to Kurt Jamungel's site, and it was posted recently. It goes for like an hour and a half, but it is absolutely mind blowing.
Okay. Cool. I'll watch that. Yep.
But
So I'm
yeah, let
still,
me know.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm
You were
still a
going to say.
scientist and a naive realist, even after our conversation. But you've given
Oh,
me
I
a
would
lot to
fully
think
expect.
about.
No, no, I am not trying to dissuade you or
Yeah.
convert you to my way of thinking. I just put my
Yeah.
ideas out there, throw them to the wind. Maybe they take plant somewhere, maybe
Yeah.
they don't. Not my business. Um, and we all have different perspectives. We're all coming at things from extremely different backgrounds and experiences, predispositions, and most importantly, temperament. I've come down to thinking that there are a couple of different temperaments, and they tell us how we want to see the world. I am of a non-reductivist temperament, and most of the people in physics are of a reductionist temperament, and that's fine. I mean, that's all just
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. A bit on history. I'm surprised that you're 70. I thought you were a lot younger.
72. Oh, no, no, I'm 72.
Oh,
Every
you're
bit of it. I
72?
I'm 72. I'm a year younger than you. I feel
Oh, okay. Wow.
exactly like I did when I was 50. I don't think I've aged much since then.
Right.
The 50s were the wildest time of my life. I had recently gotten divorced. And oh my God, what a wild time I had. Even wilder than when I was a musician. But I still feel
Right.
I physically, mentally, I can't notice any difference between now and when I was 50. I'm doing fine. I am so lucky with genes. I come from a very long-lived family. The non-smokers all lived to late 90s to early hundreds, no dementia anywhere, and I'm doing fine.
Yeah. So a little bit on timeline. So I was 15 in 1960, yeah, 66, basically. And at 57, I sobered up from cocaine and meth
Uh,
addiction and
mm.
alcoholism.
Oh,
So
wow.
sober up right there. And
Well, congratulations on that.
yeah, I didn't do it. Other people did it for me. Other people helped me with that. But anyway, and then so I've been sober for about 18 years. And but at age 15, I was reading Ellen Watts, and I had a
Uh-huh.
grand mal religious experience,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was he brought me on a thought trip when I was 15 years old, and I was like under a
Hmm.
great deal of stress because of my home life, and something blew up. So for 3 days, I had this light up the world lighting up like white snow religious experience, and that shaped a lot of my life. And then at age 19, I started on psychedelics and tried to recreate my religious experience till about maybe 1976, I think it was. So 76, so I was about 25 when I quit the psychedelics, and then I went off and became I became homeless for a while, and then I became a computer consultant. Made a lot of
Ah.
money, had some kids, got divorced in '94, and so that's and then at 57, I finally sobered the fuck up, and and that's kind of my life. But that religious experience, I would point out as probably the biggest thing that happened to me because that set up my entire. I've always been an atheist too, so all my
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
yeah, atheist, secular, physicalist, whatever. And so I was an atheist before my religious experience, during and after. So I mean, it didn't change my religion basically, but
Right. Right. No, I understand that. There's
yeah.
something
But
about
anyway,
the age of, yeah.
so,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so you did psychedelics somewhere at
Well,
what
I
age?
haven't. When I was 15.
15.
15 is a
Okay,
funny
so
age. I had a similar. It's when I was 15. I read Teilhard de Chardin's Phenomenon of Man.
Oh, you did too. Okay.
at 15, and it literally gave me that same change, and I became obsessed with philosophy and knowing ever since. Now,
Yeah.
you know, similar to, Desjardins, Teilhard de Chardin was,
Whoops. Go
he
ahead.
was a philosopher and a science. He was a paleontologist. And I, to this day, somewhat follow his path, other than I traded his Christology for the question, Heidegger's question of being, and I do physics instead of paleontology, but I still feel a real kinship with him. I also did my first acid trip at 15. I'll never forget that. I was in
Yeah.
Old Town in Chicago, and I had
Yeah.
the experience of my life. Um,
That was a
yeah, it
year
was,
after I had this spiritual experience, and about 2 or 3 years before I did acid. Northern Minnesota got acid in 1969. So I
yeah.
guess I was about 18 when I started that. But I read Desjardins in when I was 19 at Erie
Okay.
Mining Company. I was working at a mining company, and I was reading it in this like dusty taconite environment. I, I remember sitting by these 4 foot, well, I think they were 6 foot high, 4160 electric motors reading Chardin. And I was like
Yeah.
blown away by this shit. Yeah. And
Oh, it
anyway,
was. It changed. It
yeah,
just opened my mind to so much. What I've never ever moved on from, though, was his notion that we are being in its self-experience. I mean, we are here for being. We are being's mode of experiencing itself, and we're still learning how to do that.
yeah,
And that was a prime influence on me that I found right away in Heidegger. I didn't read Heidegger for a few more years, but that's when, I started taking Heidegger seriously.
yeah,
When I was in Chicago, at University of Chicago, they paid for me to be a graduate student there. I mean, they literally paid me to go to
yeah,
school there. And the idea was, because the philosophy department was all analytics and pragmatism. I wouldn't have gone there, but the German department wanted me to teach Nietzsche and Heidegger, kind of like what Clayton Kelb had been trying to do. Um, it's so yeah. I mean, Heidegger became my main philosophical focal point.
okay, yeah,
I'm not purely Heideggerian at this point. I've gone my own way, but he certainly set me on a path.
yeah. I think Ellen Watts shaped the first 50 years of my life,
Huh.
basically. So,
Yeah.
and
It's funny, we started at the
philosophy,
same time.
yeah, philosophy, I got into like, well, when I was 13, but then by the time I was 18 or 19, I abandoned it as poison because it was making me crazy. So, you know,
Uh,
then I went
to
off and I
me,
got back into it around the year 2000. So, uh,
yeah, at 15, I started playing in a rock band like at 13. At 15, I was in
yeah,
a locally popular rock band. And all I cared about up until I read that book was being on stage playing music and getting every girl I could. And that was my life. And
that, yes,
now
that,
that didn't
yeah,
change after Tyler, but I expanded to other things too.
yeah, yeah. Yep. If only I'd had myself neutered at 12, I would have,
Oh
I
no,
would
you
have
don't want to
avoided a
do
whole lot of
that.
trouble.
Oh no,
Oh,
no, that's
I
good. You don't
recommend
need
it
to
for
do
all
that.
kids. I think they should all.
No,
Oh yes, have those boys
no.
neutered. Uh, they'll be better philosophers in the long run.
Oh, I
Uh,
would never have been a philosopher without it.
oh really? Okay, I
No,
don't know.
no, that drove everything. That drove
Yeah.
everything. Without a libido, you're
Uh,
nothing.
oh my God, it's amazing. Yeah, we can. We'll talk for a minute after we get out here. But I
Okay.
think, yeah, we've gone a while, so we're going to end it, and
Okay.
we'll talk again, and hopefully you can explain a little bit more about quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
Because God, I've been looking for somebody who actually knows what the hell is going on.
Well, I'd be
Because
happy to
you
do
hear
that. Yeah.
so much bullshit in that field.
Oh, mostly it's mostly
Yeah,
what you hear. Mostly what you
yeah,
hear. Stick to the
yeah,
stuff that is shown experimentally.
right.
That's all that matters is what has been shown experimentally.
That kind of sounds
And
like Sabine Hassenfeder.
oh, she's a failed physicist who feels resentful and is a crank. And
I
she
noticed a
wants
little.
to, yeah, she wants to reduce everything to, super determinism, which goes against all experimentation. And that was
Uh,
the only. The funny thing about it was, Nick, that conversation that Kastrup had with Sabrina Hassenfelder, he had the right position. Super determinism is just simply misguided, but he couldn't explain how, and she just stomped all over him because he had no
yeah.
idea what he was talking about. But he was actually right for once.
Yeah. Every now and then Castrop says something right and then he goes and screws it up
Yeah,
in the next sentence, so
right.
yeah. Okay,
Okay,
well, we'll return to this. So we're going to end the stream. Your blog and your YouTube channel are posted in my description. Everybody go
great.
subscribe and check it out. And we'll get
Thank you.
back to it later. Okay.